Every formula in calculus looks incredibly impressive, from finding the slope of a curve to calculating the area under it to optimizing complex systems. But without one fundamental idea, none of it actually works. That idea, as the title suggests, is limits. And today, I'll show you exactly why. Calculus is undeniably powerful. It's the language of change, the tool that describes how things evolve in the real world. But without limits, there is no calculus. It simply wouldn't exist. To illustrate this, let's see why this is the case. So, what's the core problem that limits solve? Well, let's look at two concepts fundamental to calculus. The first is the calculation of a slope, or rate of change. We all know the basic formula for the slope of a line. We find two distinct points and calculate the change in y over the change in x. This works great for straight lines, where the slope is constant. But what about a curve? Here, the slope is changing at every single point. How do we find the slope at one specific single point? Intuitively, it should be the slope of the tangent line at that point. But how do we calculate that? We only have one point. To use our slope formula, we need 2 points. If we try to pick the second point infinitely close to the first, the change in x would be 0. And, as we know from arithmetic, you can't divide by 0. Division by 0 leads to a mathematical expression that is undefined. This is the first major hurdle. How do we talk about an instantaneous rate of change without causing our math to collapse? The second problem is the converse, finding an area. Imagine a simple shape like a square. The area is easy to calculate. It's just the side length squared. But now, consider the area under our curve, our parabola, between 2 points, say from x equals sine 0 to x equals sine 2. This is not a simple rectangle or triangle. It's a curved shape, and we don't have a formula for its area. There's no straight edge. So, how do we find the area of an irregular shape like this? How do we sum up the area of infinitely many tiny strips? These two problems, the division by 0 that arises when trying to measure instantaneous change, and the summing of infinite parts to find a curved area, are what calculus is designed to solve. So, how do we get around these seemingly impossible problems? The answer lies in the core idea of a limit, approaching. The genius of limits is that they allow us to see what a function should be, even if we can't evaluate it directly at a specific point. It's all about how the function behaves as you get infinitely close to a value. Let's use a number line to visualize this. Imagine we're interested in the value 3. When we talk about x approaching 3, we're not talking about x being 3. We're talking about x getting arbitrarily close to 3. It could be 2.9, 2.99, 2.999, or 3.01, 3.001. The notation for this is limit of f of x as x approaches 3. We write it like this. This reads as the limit of f of x as x approaches 3 is L. It tells us that as our input x gets closer and closer to 3, our output f of x gets closer and closer to some value, which we call the limit, L. It's like looking at the train tracks. You can see they are converging to a point on the horizon, the limit, even though the train will never physically reach that spot. So, the key takeaway is that the limit of a function at a point describes what the function is doing near that point. This subtle but profound distinction is the key to solving the problems we just discussed. Now let's apply this getting close idea to find our instantaneous rate of change and build the derivative from limits. Remember the problem. How do we find the slope of a curved line at a single point? We start by approximating it with a secant line. A secant line passes through 2 points on the curve. We'll call them x f of x, and a point a little further away, x plus h f of x plus h. The slope of this secant line is the familiar change in y over change in x. This is an average rate of change. Now, here's the clever bit. We don't want an average slope over an interval, we want the instantaneous slope at point A. So, we start getting close. We move point B closer and closer to point A. Visually, the secant line starts to rotate. As the distance h between our 2 points shrinks towards 0, our secant line starts to look more and more like the tangent line. Mathematically, we express this idea of shrinking towards 0 using a limit. We take the limit of our secant slope formula as h approaches 0. This is the formal definition of the derivative. Let's quickly see it in action with our favorite parabola, y equals x squared. We substitute x squared into our limit definition. This gives us the limit as h approaches 0 of x plus h squared minus x squared, all over h. Expanding the numerator, we get x squared plus 2xh plus h squared minus x squared. The x squared terms cancel. We're left with 2xh plus h squared over h. We can factor out an h from the numerator. The h terms then cancel. Notice we were able to cancel h because we're taking a limit as h approaches 0, not h equals 0. So h is a very small number, but it's not 0. Now, we can safely let h go to 0. The result is 2x. This is the derivative of x squared. It tells us the exact instantaneous slope at any point x. This entire process is only possible because limits provide a rigorous way to talk about getting infinitely close, avoiding that pesky division by 0. Limits also provide the foundation for the other pillar of calculus, the integral. The integral solves our second problem, finding the area under a curve. As we saw, finding the area of a curved region directly is difficult. Just like with the derivative, the key is approximation. The method is called a Riemann sum, and it involves approximating the area with rectangles. Let's go back to our parabola, y equals x squared, and find the area from x equals 0 to x equals 2. We start by dividing this interval into a few rectangles. Let's start with 4. Each rectangle has the same width, which we call delta x, or change in x. The height of each rectangle is determined by the function's value at one of the rectangle's edges. The sum of the areas of these 4 rectangles gives us a rough estimate of the total area. You can clearly see it's an underestimate or an overestimate depending on which edge we choose for the height. How can we get a better estimate? By using more rectangles. If we double the number of rectangles to 8, the estimate improves. The gaps between the rectangles and the curve become smaller. The approximation is better. Imagine doing this not just for 4 or 8 rectangles, but for n rectangles, where n is some large number. As we add more and more rectangles, their individual widths, delta x, get smaller and smaller. The sum of their areas gets closer and closer to the true area under the curve. This process of making n infinitely large, which simultaneously makes the width of each rectangle delta x infinitely small, is the limit. The exact area is the limit of this Riemann sum as n approaches infinity. This is the definition of the definite integral. The squiggly s shape is an elongated s for sum. The dx is our infinitely small delta x. Just like the derivative, the integral is built entirely on the concept of limits. It allows us to sum an infinite number of infinitely small things to arrive at a finite, precise answer. So, we've seen that limits are the theoretical backbone of calculus, giving us the tools for exact instantaneous rates and exact areas. But calculus isn't just theory. It's the engine that drives engineering, physics, economics, and countless other fields. And in these fields, limits are used not just conceptually, but computationally. Think about a flight simulator. A plane is flying through turbulent air. To accurately model its behavior, the computer needs to calculate its acceleration, which is the second derivative of its position, at every fraction of a second. The simulator isn't solving the limit definition algebraically. Instead, it's solving it numerically. It's using a very small, but not 0, value of h. Let's say h equals 1/100th of a second. It calculates the derivative at a point by finding the slope between that point and a point 0.01 seconds later. It's an approximation, but with a small h, it's a very good one. The entire simulation is a series of incredibly fast limit approximations. Another crucial application is signal processing. When you listen to music on your phone, the continuous sound waves are converted into discrete digital data. An analog to digital converter takes samples at regular intervals, say 44,100 times per second. To reconstruct the smooth, continuous sound, your phone's digital to analog converter essentially has to fill in the gaps between the data points. It does this by using a limit-like process, interpolating between the discrete samples to create a continuous waveform. The smoother the wave, the better the sound. And the smoother the wave, the more accurately the DA converter is approximating the original continuous function. In other words, it's performing a numerical integration, a high-speed sum of infinitesimally small pieces, just like our limit definition of the integral. Beyond the applications, limits offer a profound philosophical insight into the nature of mathematics itself. At its heart, calculus is about handling infinity, or more precisely, the infinitely small and the infinitely large, without breaking the fundamental rules of arithmetic. Without limits, Calculus would be a chaotic mess of division by zero errors and impossible sums. We saw this with our initial problems. Limits are the rigorous framework that tames these infinities. They allow us to speak precisely about what happens when you divide something by an infinitely small number, or when you add an infinite sequence of terms. Consider the Zeno's paradox of Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles gives the tortoise a head start. By the time Achilles reaches the tortoise's starting point, the tortoise has moved forward a bit. By the time Achilles reaches that new point, the tortoise has moved again. Zeno argued that Achilles would never catch the tortoise. The paradox arises from our inability to intuitively sum an infinite series of smaller and smaller steps. But calculus, using limits, solves this. This is a geometric series. Each step is half the previous one. We can write a formula for the sum of the first n terms. This is the approximate sum. To find the exact total distance Achilles needs to run, we find the limit of this sum as n approaches infinity. As n gets larger and larger, 1/2 to the power of n gets closer and closer to 0. So the limit is 1. Limits prove that Achilles will catch the tortoise right at the 1-mile mark. This demonstrates the deep insight limits provide. They bridge our finite intuition with the world of the infinite. They are the language that allows math to be consistent and powerful, even in the face of these profound concepts. So, let's bring this all together. We started by asking how we measure instantaneous change in areas of curved shapes. The core problem was that our basic tools, like division and finite summation, couldn't handle these tasks without breaking down, resulting in undefined expressions. The solution came in the form of limits, the idea of getting infinitely close to a value without ever actually touching it. This simple, profound concept changed everything. Limits are the bedrock upon which all of calculus is built. They give us the derivative, the exact instantaneous rate of change. And they give us the integral, the exact area under a curve. Both of these fundamental concepts are defined using limits. Whether you're looking at a derivative or an integral, you are at a fundamental level looking at a limit. All those impressive formulas are just shortcuts, patterns that we've found by repeatedly applying the limit process. If you truly understand limits, calculus stops being a collection of complex, magical formulas. It becomes a rational, coherent framework for describing the world. It works, fundamentally, because limits allow us to deal with change and accumulation in a way that is both powerful and precise.